Hi, everyone. So excited to be here, especially with my good friends and colleagues, Dave Snell, Jason Jurado. Today is the coaches show, and the word of the day is teachable. Chat is wide open. Love to hear your comments. There's been a couple issues with chat that Restream I reported and is working on, and they identified it. With that said, I'll be checking comments on my profile also, or on the post today that this is appearing on. And that's what I did yesterday. Had about 12, 15 comments that we're able to share without seeing. But we do appreciate the interactive nature of the audience and love to be guided in the most relevant ways. With that said, I'll turn it right over to Dave, and Dave can kind of give you a quick update, plus his initial thoughts on Teachable. Dave.
Hey, good morning, guys. It's always great to be here. I'll just jump right in. Nothing really new on my side, just keeping busy with work. But Teachable brings up a couple of thoughts that everybody is teachable. Everybody has to be open-minded to new things and new thoughts. And two things that come to mind is, I'll shoot with the first word is expert. And I remember reading John Boyd, the developer of the OODA loop. And he said, nobody's an expert. If you say you're an expert, that tells everybody you're unteachable. And nobody should be unteachable. And at the same time, I thought of the quote by Albert Einstein. It says, if you can't explain something to the level of a 5-year-old, then you don't really understand it yourself. So you have to be teachable to understand it and keep learning through a process of experience and reading and understanding and conversation. Otherwise, what's the point of going on? You're just going to be the perfect person in the room. There's no such thing.
Well, that's a great way to launch, and it makes a lot of sense. I'll turn it right over to Jason before I get too involved.
Yeah, Dave, great to be here with both of you gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to join you in conversation. The community too. Love to hear from the community. Yeah, Dave came out guns blazing. All right, so let's get right to it. Yeah, and just to go on off of those thoughts, I one of the things I always teach is to have a curious and flexible mindset. And that's teachable, and that's someone that's, or and I'm just going to put a lot of stuff on the table right now. Or in Zen Buddhism, we talk about beginner's mind. And we talk about mindfulness, having that beginner's mind and not thinking you know everything. I used to work in San Francisco and live and work in San Francisco. And, that's a big tourist place. And, when you talk about tourists, people are like, oh, tourists, this and that. I always want to be a tourist. I always want to see things through those eyes, to those unjaded, open eyes, and to touch it back to like coaching. You have to be teachable, and if you want to change but you don't want to change, that's a challenge. And whoever you work with, whether it's a mentor, a coach, a therapist, whatever, in that role, you have to be honest with yourself and say, am I open to this? Am I truly open to this? I say sometimes, like myself, physician, heal thyself, where I have things that I have to work on, and I have to be okay. You're ready. You have to do the work. Don't be a hypocrite. So.
A little bit of a pause there. I'll take that as a time for me to say hello. And before I do it, I'm so happy to share that comments are working. Carrie says, what do you say to an Italian astronaut? Pasta la vista, baby. Well, that's not bad. A different one than usual. We've got Carl here. Carl, everybody knows Carl is part of our cohort group. He has his show on Tuesdays, which is the, I believe, instant funding show or something to that regard. Also launched his second show, which is Thursdays, that precedes this show at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, both Tuesday and Thursday. And also launched a separate newsletter for that show, has his own daily newsletter, launched a weekly newsletter that brings all the newsletters from the week together in a composite. And is just high flying. And, if you're talking about teachable, it's a two-way street, not just the people you're trying to coach, but you need to be teachable. You need to be open to new learning, and learning is a consistent, constant activity. And it's hard to advance, like Jason had mentioned, if you're not staying current, if you're not focused on what's relevant, what's cutting edge, and you want to be open and allowing other people to be open to you. You know, there's a saying, it's hard to sell what you don't buy, right? And if you're telling people what to do, but you're not doing it, if you're telling people you need it, but I don't, you're really, you know, even if you chose to stand still, the world won't stand still for you or with you. That's right. Carl's always good at bringing me up to scratch. Successful Funding Show and Community Revitalization Show are the two shows. And the second show is an initiative Carl's doing, you know, testing it out in how to get more community redevelopment, bring jobs to places that need them, employ the communities that people live in, and doing that as a model, has a good group of people to start with, and hopefully as it works, it'll scale into more and more cities. So very excited for Carl and what he's doing. So moving it back to Dave, you know, when did you become a motivated learner, or have you always been that way?
Depends on who you ask, I would assume, because my dad would tell you I've been a stubborn mule for most of my life, I think, when it comes to learning. And I say that, and the story comes to mind of we used to live in Spain, and we'd go off base. My dad spoke Spanish because that's what he did in the Navy. He was a linguist at times, depending on where he was. And I used to say, hey, Dave, why don't you try these new words? And I'd say, Dad, I don't need to learn that. Then on the drive home, I'd be like, hey, look at all these new words that, you know, they taught me. And he's like, I tried to tell you. So it depends on your environment is my point, you know. And you ask, you know, when did I become someone who wants to learn? It depends on who you ask, I think, you know, because the environment is different. And I think that depending on where you are at different points in your career. You know, from a career perspective, there are things that you're not going to be able to learn necessarily in your specific field, but there are aspects of how you interact with people, how you interact with clients, that's always changing, and you need to adapt to an environment. You need to learn how the market is changing, how the customers are changing. That changes. You need to learn what's going on around you. So if you just go in, well, this is how I did it back in 1995, well, 2024 is a much different environment, you know, not just technologically, but individually and personally personnel interacting with others. You have to be malleable through the learning process to know how to achieve what you need to do. So, you know, as I've looked through my life, it's been well, I know a lot about this, but I don't know a lot about something else. So while I'm still learning my profession, I want to learn more about, you know, scuba diving or my running or my mental health or whatever the subject is. And I put myself into it. And as you were talking also, Don, it occurred to me that, you know, I always point back to these books behind me, but some of these books are about things that happened back in World War II, during the Cold War, whether they're from the history, but there's also some mental health books that I read and self-help books and Buddhism. But I just listened to a book last week, and it was quite a lengthy history of espionage between the Soviet Union and the West, and a little bit into China and the West. And I said, you know, I've got all these books. Why do I need to listen to another one? And as I went through it, the guy said, well, this was just released in 2022. Well, no book behind me has got new information in it. So there's always this process of, okay, going back, and yes, a lot of it was repetitive, but then there was something new, and that changes my thoughts on what did I know about the past with new information. There's always something new coming forth because we don't have all the information. No matter how many times I look at my daughter, will Google that. Well, you already told me. I said, well, something may have changed. Look at new information, repetitive. Getting it in her head that, hey, this is a fact you need to know. So get it in there, repeat it. Just my first thoughts there.
Yeah, I think what that lends itself is creating disciplines. where there's a certain, just like in any part of your day or life, you have times for certain things and you have ways to achieve them. Could be eating, could be exercising, could be working, and getting into a discipline that is something you look forward to. Because I think part of being teachable is knowing how to teach, but also knowing how to learn. And learning both of those are critical. So without stealing too much thunder, Jason?
Yeah, great points. And the same question that you asked Dave, I would say that I've always been a learner. It's always been a passion of mine. I've always been excited about learning. But I'll say this too, though, because I don't want to, I talk about how we come across to our community here that's with us. I don't want to say, oh, it's easy. And that's me personally. I've always had a passion about learning I remember being in the third grade on recess, I would go to the library and I would look at art books, or I would look at other books, and I just was always excited about that. Everyone's not like that, and that's okay. To your point, Don, these are things that we have to have discipline. In the past, I know in the different show, we've talked about motivation. Motivation could be huge too. So there's things that I have to work on that I'm not that excited about, that I don't do. Like you talked about, fitness and weight loss and working out. And, I love martial arts. I love being physical, but there's stuff that I have to do that I'm like, oh, get it done, And so if that's the way you are with a certain area of your life, just being open, though, just saying, okay, I don't do everything. I don't know everything. Let's see what I can pick up. What is there that'll, because it's about a spark. We all have a little bit of darkness around us. What's that spark that can illuminate your world? And usually, they say that one flame lights a lot of candles, and it goes on. For me, I light one candle that now I can see that next candle, and I light that next candle, and it illuminates through more, and I can see more candles, and it's just an ongoing process. So I think the more we're open to it, the more it comes to us.
Yeah, those are excellent points, because I think if one could achieve a level of joy in what they do, right? The joy of learning, the joy of discovery, the joy of, wow, I didn't even know that existed, and here's what it does. It keeps that curiosity and imagination alive.
Yeah.
When people say, oh, I got to do this, instead of saying, I'm lucky to be able to do this.
Exactly.
And, if you don't want to do something, you shouldn't, because you won't do it very well, and you'll drag through it, or just, click it off your list for the day, versus really being, returning to innocence in a way, forgetting about a lot of what you learned, so you could either relearn it or get more contemporary with it and more relevant. And there's so many ways to learn and to be taught. And I think openness goes a long way, and acceptance. There's so many organizations that ask for advice but don't want it, or only want the advice that they're looking for.
Right.
And you got to figure that out, which is twice as hard as figuring out what the real answer is, let alone what is the expected answer. So, it's a process, but, if you can structure your day where every hour or where every segment is something that builds on the last segment, right? So if you have a great breakfast, you're in a better position to go to work. If you have a great workout, you're in a better position to get healthier. And I guess knowing why you're doing it makes all the difference. So if you're doing something that's getting you ahead, you're looking at it as a competitive advantage. If you're looking at something just because I have to do it or I need to do it, usually that comes in when someone else tells you what to do that you didn't plan on doing, didn't care to do. And when you're done with it, you care even less to do it again. So Carl comes back. Well, first, Dennis is here. Thank you for showing up, Dennis. I'm so glad. And, it just shows you, I had that issue yesterday. On the bottom of Restream, it has a little round button says need help. So during the segment, I typed out, hey, comments aren't showing up, blah, blah, blah. and I don't want to get too much into detail, before I sent them an inquiry, said, well, if you're not live, we can't test anything. So anyways, they tested it, said, you're right. Comments are going to LinkedIn. They're not going to Restream, even though they're showing up on YouTube. Make a long story short, afterwards, they said, we'll check it all out. Somehow today it's working. Carl comes back with, yes, continuous learning and now expedited rates of learning using new tools in your personal network. I think everybody is now inundated and overwhelmed with information. Before, you had limited sources. You can go to the library. If you're lucky, you had an encyclopedia at home, possibly, where you could actually look things up. And they used to come out with a new book every year, which was an update of all your old books in a sense. So you were only a year behind, if that. And some people were living in the past and couldn't get out of it. Today, with Google, with YouTube, with groups like this, with live streams, audio events, I mean, you could live on LinkedIn or anywhere and never exhaust all the information. And tomorrow it's going to change again. The challenge is, I think, is where do you balance knowing and doing? Yeah. There's so many smart people, if you qualify them as being smart by education. I mean, there's lifelong PhDs that get different degrees and different things. They never do anything with it. In some ways, it's better to know nothing and do nothing, to know everything and do nothing, right? Because you spend a lot of time accumulating things you're not using, and you're probably lost yourself in data or whatever. So, Dave.
Well, no question. I think, you mentioned the encyclopedia, and it just reminded me that, my dad, I don't think he'll ever watch this, to be honest with you. I mean, he's into technology, but he's not on LinkedIn. He's retired. But, for one Christmas stocking stuffer or small gift, he would always get me I can count for at least 8 years in a row, the World's Almanac. That was my research first go-to on a topic. Okay, how many people lived in Angola in 1972? I don't know. I mean, it didn't matter. But those old ways of doing things are adapted to new technologies, as Carl pointed out. And I'd like to, take a little detour here for a second. But when we're teachable, we do a number of things for ourselves and those around us. Is we make other people feel good. If I walk into a room and I say, I know everything and you can't tell me anything, you're not going to open up to me. You're going to be like, well, that guy's a pompous putz and I don't want to talk to him. I'm a sailor, but I watched it.
I saw the pause.
But if I go in and I say, hey, what is it that you have? What do you do? What do you bring to the table? What experience, I don't know enough about how to use LinkedIn Live for a podcast or for a connection. Teach me. Well, that means I'm teachable and that we can connect on some level and you can share your information. Maybe I know everything that I need to know, but I want to approach you and start a conversation. And how we make people feel, teachability opens up the doors for connection. Otherwise, we start closing ourselves off to, I know everything and I'm not going to do anything with it. Because as you pointed out, Don, to know something and you need to learn and teach at the same time. I can learn something if it's not the knowledge I have, it's the emotions. So many people are shut off from connecting anymore because of technology, because of COVID, whatever it is. I think teachable. I'm taking it a little off course, but I think there is a tie-in here to how we interact with people. Because if I'm not teachable, I'm going to shut down and I'm going to isolate myself, and that's not good either. Yeah,
those are excellent points, Jason.
Yeah, while you're talking about that, made me think about something. So, well, I don't know if you all know, but I know you gentlemen know that my background's in neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and it's, using the language of the mind to get the results you want. And we process a certain way. That's just the study of how we process, how our brain works and things of that nature. And not what we think, but how we think. And two things I want to mention when I mention that is rapport. we like people that are like us, basically. So building rapport, building that relationship, and relationships matter when it comes to teaching. Because if you have a feeling that, well, this person can't teach me anything, you're going to shut down, you're not be open to it. And that's part of it, is that you have to be open. We can all learn something from everyone. And that's if you have that mindset, life just gets richer, fuller of color. I'm blessed in my local community to meet a lot of people. I work like on the Chamber of Commerce, and so I get to meet a lot of the business owners and people that have been around a while and stuff. And people are just people. Everyone's just, it's Dave and it's Don, it's Jason, but we all have our own wealth of knowledge. We all have our wealth of experiences. And if you're not open to that, you're going to miss a lot. Like I'll be introduced to somebody and we'll be having a chat, and I'm just, this is just a person and I met here in town and they were tired. I don't know what they've done, blah, blah, blah. We're talking and might talk about psychology. And it's like, oh, well, I was a professor at UC Davis, the local college. I was a professor at UC Davis for 30 years and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay. And if I would have approached this person like, well, they don't have anything to teach me, I wouldn't have been blessed would be able to pick their brain and learn that knowledge. And so relationships do matter when it becomes when about being teachable. And the last thing I'll say about that is, because I'm on the NLP thing right now, is we have a learning method where you imagine so say you're going to an actual learning location. You're in a class, you're in a school, something like that. You imagine that the top of your head opens up and all information is coming into you, and you're allowing that information to come into you. And just that mental picture allows your brain to absorb more information, believe it or not. So there's a lot of little tricks and tools to learn more, but it's all about the mindset, and it's all about being open to it and learning from everybody.
Yeah, I think that's so valid and important, because you can't want something for somebody more than they want it for themselves. You can't transfer something to somebody who won't accept it or has limited access or availability. But when you're teaching, you're also learning from the person you're teaching, right, as to how are they responding, mm-hmm, right? What questions are they sending you back? And how do you learn more about them? How do you learn to better serve people? And I think the other element that was just discussed was, what are you trying to learn? Mm-hmm. Are you learning information, or are you learning insights from somebody? And you're right, that some of the most modest people are some of the wisest people. Yeah. And maybe they didn't work on the most sophisticated things, or they just had a regular, normal, if you can say anything is normal, but just a traditional upbringing, traditional occupation, traditional life. Well, during that whole thing, they have experienced extraordinary things, because it's not what you have or who you are, it's what you're around. Yeah. People that live off the land know things that we could never understand or appreciate. And at the end of the day, if you don't equate that with happiness and satisfaction, you can't really call yourself successful, right? You do everything great, you're well revered and recognized, and you feel awful every day because maybe it's not you anymore. Maybe you're just good at something that people pay a lot for, but you've had it. And how many people downsize when they can? Right? They decide, I'm going to go out in the country and build a house and be done with it and live off the land or close to it. And they find themselves, they've never been happier. And I think, part of it is change. Yeah. Try to eat the same meal every day and you'll live, you'll survive. But at what point do you say, this is getting old, or it's not satisfying anymore? Yeah. And I think that's where the teacher comes in, is gives you the switch to move to a new track, mm-hmm, or even more importantly, to take you by the hand for a while and lead you there. Right. How challenging, but also how rewarding was learning how to ride a bike for the first time. Because that's one of the ways where you learn circumstances. If you didn't stay steady, you fell. you fell enough times, you didn't want to fall anymore. I mean, luckily, when you're young, you can scrape your knees, and in 2 hours, it's healed again, and you're close to the ground, so falling isn't that big of a deal. But, consequences makes a difference. If you do something at risk, I mean, for reward, and there's no risk, it doesn't have the same meaning. When you're stepping out there on a ledge, you got to be a little bit more thoughtful. You got to be a little bit more careful. And you're always open to someone lending you a hand at that point. A lot of people say, let me help you. And it's like, I can handle it. When you get into a dangerous situation, you're looking everywhere for that person to say, I can help you out.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a teacher really shows up, is when it's consequential. There's a lot of people that teach and coach just because they're good at it, and just because they take people from one habit and all they did was bring them into another habit, But how many people can launch people? I see that as being key is, hey, you're here until you're there. And my goal is to get you from here to there. So Dave.
Either way, all good. I think as I'm thinking here, it really comes down to whether your point about people just staying static, being idle, if you will, Don, is what's your growth mindset? Are you willing to grow? If you're happy with just being static in your life, great. That's good for you. I don't think it's healthy as a human. We need the change. We need the dynamicism of life, because if we look at the day-to-day, the days are the same. Midnight to midnight, we have 24 hours in the day, but nothing in the day from one day to the next is the same. We always see change. No matter whether we want to mindfully stay the same and just go through our regular routine, the sky's changing, the winds change, the weather changes, people around us are always moving. There's always something. And if I have a desire to go beyond where it is I am, I want to grow, then I'm going to be teachable. I'm going to be able to understand I don't know everything. If I'm just going to stay static, life is boring. And to your point, we need change. We live in a world of change is my point. Nothing is the same. There's the old saying of, well, I could go to Yorktown, which is about an hour and a half up north from me, and I could walk the same ground that our forefathers walked. Really, I'm not. Because through time, and I'm not going to get too Albert Einstein on this here, but through time, that's not the same ground. It's the same area, it's the same general idea, but things have changed. That ground is not the same. The soil is not the same. Whatever you want to look at it, I have change going on around me all the time. And if I want to grow on the knowledge that I had before to make change in the world for the positive, I've got to be teachable and learn something different. And I'm going here in a little bit of a direction of where are we today as a society? We're in this your side, my side, but we're not willing to listen, to learn and grow and teach together. We're just on this, you're on your left, you're on your right. I'm not getting political. It's just we get stuck in our mindset that we're not willing to learn or understand the other side. And what does that lead to? Conflict. And that's not healthy for growing. That's a net negative into the abyss, if you will. So to kind of just take it, it's growth mindset and how do I want to positively change? And we've got to think individually, as a community, as a society. There's multiple levels, and we just get very static into ourselves too easily that we think our way is the only way. You can watch YouTube videos or Facebook reels of Karens yelling at somebody because they didn't get what they wanted and they were offended. Well, they're not looking at it from another perspective. They're not growing. They're not understanding the other person's perspective because they're unteachable. It's about themselves, not the bigger, I don't want to say society again, but the organization or the relationships with others. A little off topic again, but
no,
there's a tie again to how we approach growing and perspective of others' relationships, because nobody's experiences are all the same. You know, we've pointed that out a couple of times. We could go through the same experience, but take something different from it. And the book I'm listening to now is about ethics and intelligence. You know, intelligence is my strongest background and drove me to private investigations. But scenarios where I was very hard on, you know, hey, this is the right answer, we should do this operation. And the author brings in 6 or 7 different other perspectives, from policymakers to students, because he's an instructor at Texas A&M, professor. And it's a variety of perspectives. And I have to go, well, this is how I did think about it. This is how I do think about it. You know, back when I was in the Navy and intelligence, how I think about it now. And there's change. There's something different happening with me. So we always have to look at the changes that are going on around. And that comes from being teachable. We can grow.
Yeah, those are great points. And I'll swing it over to Jason real quick. But what it reminds me of when it's fresh is people are not labels, but people label other people.
Yeah.
Right? And without getting into politics, not everyone is all conservative about everything. Not everybody is liberal about everything. Right? Some people are liberal about how they eat. They'll eat the most exotic stuff, which a conservative person might not. They might, I mean, there's so many parts of the human element that to join a group instead of being your own person first. And I think actually, if you look at politics without getting political, the biggest party now is independents. It's about 27 Republican, 27 Democrats, and 46 independents. And it's moving more towards independence because a lot of things don't align. And you can't full-heartedly say, I'm going to join this group. So you say, hey, I'm going to stay in the middle. I'll stay independent, and I'll decide based on merit,
right,
based on values, that this is what I'm going to follow. And I think part of teaching is knowing what your value system is, knowing what your moral compass is, to say, hey, at this point, I'm not going any further, or I'm backing up out of here at this point. So Jason.
Great point. And, you know, Dave opened the can, so I'm going to go ahead and pour it out and have a serving of it. The Karens and the Chads of the world, from a psychology standpoint, and you feel free to disagree with me, but if you go down and dig into it deep, they just feel like they're not heard. And wherever it comes from, wherever it's been, they feel like, well, no one pays attention to me. I don't get what I want, so I want what I want now. And a lot of times it comes from negative relationships where in the past, whether it's parental, whether it's, you know, a spouse, a boyfriend, girlfriend, they were in a bad situation where they feel they weren't heard. And so now you're going to listen to me. It's all about me now. Now's my turn. And the reason I go deep into that, a little deeper into that, is because that comes into being teachable, and that comes into learning, because guess what? And this is why I love these LinkedIn Lives, these communities things. Are you being lectured to? Or are you being supported in your learning? That's the difference. And that's why I went back to the Karen thing, because are you just telling me what I'm going to know? Or do you actually care about me? Do you actually want me to help assist me and support me in learning? And that's about being, that feeds into, are you teachable? Because if your mindset is, well, someone's just trying to change the way I think, talking about politics, you know, it's like, no, I want to have a conversation. I want to find out what you think. I want to see, and maybe that's not, you know, maybe teachable is not the right word for that political conversation, but it is. It truly is a moment where we can both learn from each other. But if neither of us is open to learning something new, well, it's a dead conversation. So I think your intention and how you approach it really can stand to change the direction of how you learn.
Well, and I think I'll move it over to Dave, but what that brings up is, are you following what you hear, or are you following what you see? Right? and actions speak louder than words. And over time, people demonstrate themselves by what did they do, not what did they tell other people to do, not what did they say that they believe in, because if they're not doing what they believe in, in a sense, they're a bad place to be learning from. And then the other thing about being a teacher or learning from a teacher is how compassionate and sympathetic are they to your ignorance,
Yeah.
right? If you come in like scuba diving, right? I know very little about it. If I wasn't open to hearing what somebody who knew what they were talking about was saying, I'd be in a bad position. And I wouldn't be helping them at all if I was lying to them. Go to the doctor, have a problem with your ankle, and tell them, well, I just don't feel well. Well, you're not giving them a lot to work with, and why did you go there if you knew you had an issue, but you didn't want to discuss it? Dave.
These are all great points. I'm going back in my head, and I don't want to get into the military life, but it occurs to me that Jason can relate to this. I think is when we get into the military, we're taught. We're not even taught. We're just told. We're dictated to. You will do this. SOP by this, and at the same time, we have to your point, Don. What are we being told versus what we see? And being lectured to is a good basis, so we get a foundation of what it is we need to know. When you learn something, you need to know some basic facts about whatever the subject is. Scuba diving, hey, breathing is good, not breathing is bad. Exhaling on the ascent, bad. Okay, is good rather. So there's some basics that we need to know, and it's the foundations that allow us to then take the experience, take those foundations into the experience to broaden our perspective. Because as I said before, the three of us could go through the basic foundations, the similar for scuba diving, but each time we dive, it's going to be unique to us. Okay. You're going to have a problem with buoyancy, or I'll say I do have problems with buoyancy. You're going to have problems with, breathing too fast and having to calm down, or Jason's going to have too much weight and need to learn the next time he goes down not to use as much weight, whatever it is. Each of those experiences is going to be unique. And then if we go into, okay, we're back on the boat. Hey, how was your dive, Don? Well, I'm not breathing very well. I need to calm down. Okay, great. Now I have to go, am I doing the same thing? Because I was so wrapped up on my BCD being right. Maybe my breathing was the problem. So we start to learn from each other as we share individual experiences. And that's a teachable moment to say, look, you don't know what I went through, but let me share with you. And then we just grow. And that's how I'll go back to society again is the shared experiences grow us instead of, isolating. And I don't know why exactly I'm going back to these 2 points of isolation and societal growth. And I think it's a mental health thing that I always gravitate back to. So many people want to just stay in their rooms. They don't want to interact. And then we see a spike in the mental health issues that we have in the society today. But if we were open to more interaction, learning something new, whatever it is, we would see our opportunities broaden, our happiness go up. We wouldn't feel lonely anymore because we're interacting with people. And again, you pointed out a little bit ago, Don, we need change. We need that, excitement, if you will, something to get jazzed about. And that's how we do that, is by interacting with others and being open, as you pointed out as well, to learning something new. And whether you're excited about it or just letting somebody else talk and get excited about their side, those are interactions that we can't replicate through typing on a computer, having a chat in a DM. There's something more exciting about seeing reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason?
So many great points. When I'm talking about the military, and you're a naval officer and I was in the Marine Corps, and we both refer to the fleet, being out in the fleet. When you're in school and you're getting all these facts, and I want to talk about the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. You get a lot of facts, and then But then you get out to the fleet, you get out to where you're actually doing your career in the military, and you see some salty dog that's been around forever and has learned the ways to do things, and they teach you, yeah, I know this is what you learned in school. I've been doing this for 20 years. Let me show you, you know? And so that's talking about sources, where your knowledge is coming from, and who you're getting it from, and what you're learning. And you have to learn the facts. I tell people that, you know, this is kind of a sideways thing, but you have to know the rules before you can break the rules. And so, you know, let's start with learning the rules. Let's start with the basics, and then you can see the nuances. Then you can learn that stuff, and that's part of the learning education process. But if you're closed down, you're gonna miss it. You're gonna miss it somewhere. There's gonna be a disconnect, because if you're just learning it because you have to learn it, you're gonna get some of the facts, and you're not necessarily going to be open to learn letter ways. You know what? Listen, this is how I was taught at school. This is what I'm going to do. That's it. And you're limiting yourself. That's the thing. I guess my point about all this is that we're limitless, yet our brain sometimes limits us in the sense that it's like, nope, I got enough. Let's just do this. And it's like, well, why not learn more? You know, why not grow? Why not continue to get this information? And that's about, you know, talking about being teachable, if you're open to that. And a point that both of you have made is, you know, looking at the students as a teacher, looking at the students and seeing how they learn. Because if you cookie cutter and you just try to give information to everybody in the same way, someone is missing out. And that's why it's so important to be on. Well, first of all, if you're learning something, to be honest with yourself and say, I don't get it. You know, I love going, I love learning. I talked about that already. But when I'm in a classroom, I'm the person that raises his hand and asks questions. And you know what? Let's just say an easy number. 50% of the time, I know the answer, but I can read the room and see that someone else doesn't, and they're not going to ask the question. You know, and that flips into me as an instructor, a trainer, or a teacher as well, where you have to read your student, whether it's 1 or it's 100, and see how people are taking that information, because maybe they do want to learn, but in the way that you're conveying it is not accessible to them. So then you have to adjust for them. So there's a lot of nuance. It is a reciprocal relationship learning, you know, and that's why I'll leave this last piece here. I met with someone yesterday, and first time, he's a friend of the family. He's actually just moved into town where I live, and he's getting his master's in social work. And so I know some people in the field, and we're gonna connect. We're connecting, and I'm gonna help him out. So we were just having a good conversation yesterday, and we were both coming from the place where I said, you know I can look up anything on Google, but I would much rather talk to somebody who has wisdom, who's lived it. You know, like both of you have so knowledge from your pasts, you know, and you're both open to growing, which is amazing, and that's why I love being here with you. But I'd rather ask you than look it up on that. You know, I'd rather ask you a question about running businesses, Don, than just Google, well, how does this work? Because you lived it and you saw the nuance of it. And so I think that's part of the learning process is being open to where the information is going to come from and to where you can learn it the best.
Yeah, those are great points. And, you know, all these discussions we have makes you go back into areas you had forgotten about, right? Someone says something, it ignites a memory or a thought. And looking at my early days in school, I was just awful. and you know, I really was. And it wasn't because I scored really high on all those tests they gave you. And I was just looking back, it wasn't for me. I was bored.
Yeah.
You know, when class size gets to the point where nobody is individualized, right? And you look at what you're learning, and even as a young person, I said, I don't know why I'm ever going to need to know French, right? And I just decided I probably wouldn't. And it might surprise people, but I don't think there was a while I didn't flunk a class. And it's not easy to flunk a class if you go every day and participate, and you can't even get a D out of it. And it wasn't I was incorrigible. I just was disinterested. and it was somewhere I had to go every day, not somewhere I enjoyed going every day. And looking back, it was the type of school or this type of schooling that didn't serve me at the time.
Right.
And then you get feeling less than everybody, right? Everybody's getting A's and you're flunking a class. But what it did do, which was kind of interesting, I don't think there was a year I didn't go to summer school. You know, so I went year round because I had to make up for the class. And while I was there, I picked up 4 classes. And before you knew it, I graduated 2 years early.
Wow.
You know, my goal was get out of here as fast as I could, not knowing where I was going to go to, but knowing it wasn't where I wanted. But what was interesting is I moved up and it became a little more independent. You know, and when I got to college, it was totally, no one cared. No one took attendance. No one cared. You paid your price. You could stay home. It didn't matter. And I thrived. So luckily I hung in there long enough to learn enough. But the lesson I learned was really from people on the street. You know, I never lived on the street, but back then, I think it's been said, everybody's door was open. Everybody didn't seem like a threat to you. The police were your buddies, right? Anytime you saw a policeman, you felt safe. And so growing up, I learned things from seeing things, being part of it. I mean, you grow in a city like Detroit, in the city, you see a lot of stuff you'll never see in a textbook. And the best education you can ever get is learning about people, how to relate to people, and understanding context. Like until you see how people live, you don't know how you're living. You know, some people live in a homogenized neighborhood where everything is a white picket fence and everybody's happy. I mean, outwardly, there's just as much unhappiness, maybe more. But you don't know that until you get beyond that.
Right.
You never know what you're into until you're really out of it. And then you can look back and you could say, oh, wow, I thought this was better, or I thought this was worse. And you find out there is no good or bad or worse. It's just life.
Right.
And how you adapt to it. And wherever you are is never going to be where you're going to end up. It doesn't work that way. You can't just say, stop the world, I want to get off. And that's another thing about learning. What's good for you today won't be good for you tomorrow, even if you want it to be, because the world will change on you. And I think once you can learn how to work with people, and where I really got ahead was I spent all my time in psychology when I was in school, knowing that whatever I do is going to involve people, and knowing people and how they think is going to be vital. And I graduated like a 3.8 because I loved it. I could never get enough of it. And the only reason I loved it so much, it was an inexact science, right? The geometry, if you didn't know the theorems or whatever, you failed. There was no way of coming up with something. But what intrigued me about psychology is you'd have 2 totally different philosophies, and they were both accepted if they could be justified. So it meant you were never wrong. You were just never as relevant as possible. And the human mind and the human nature is so dynamic that you can't say, well, you're this or you're that. And I think people don't want to be labeled or characterized. People want to be motivated. And I think that's the other element about being a teacher is how much fun are you having with your kids? And how much fun are the kids having with you? And I know I had teachers that I couldn't wait for them to start talking. And other teachers that I just would shut down because it was like, learn this, do this. There was no interaction or discussion. I think that makes all the difference. And that's why we bring the audience in. That's why we try to share with each other. Because the smartest person is the person who learns from somebody else's experience, because it's too expensive and too time consuming to know it all. And if you like Jason said, if someone's been doing it for 20 years, I give them credit. They must have learned something and also willing to teach me. And I think when someone's willing to go out of their way to teach you something, share something with you with really no direct benefit to themselves, then you think the intention and the purpose is there. And, half of it is believing it is. That's the placebo effect. Right now it's almost up to 40%, and it grows every year and nobody understands why. But it's all about suggestion. You take something saying, this is going to make me stronger, all of a sudden you feel a little stronger, and it pays for itself and allows you to do it again. So, Dave.
Well, I know we're coming up on the top here again because it goes by so quick, as we say every time. But, thinking back to your comments, Jason, of knowledge, having the basis, then to the experience, to the wisdom, and let me just take it off here a little bit here is history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes, is a quote I've heard several times in the last 3 weeks. And while we can have all the data and we can have other people with experience, again, our experiences are going to be different because while things are going to repeat themselves, there's going to be some nuance. I've heard that word a couple of times here of what's going to be different. It's not going to repeat itself. We're not going to have the exact same answer every time, but I'm going to have a little shift to it that I have to bring a perspective to that will adapt to the current environment. Because again, nothing is the same exactly. I can't go to Yorktown and stand in our forefathers' exact spot, but it's going to be close. It's a very good representation, very close representation, little nuance to the change that I'm going to experience today because I've taken the time to learn about the history and the data and the other person's experience. It helps me gain experience that I can then pass on to somebody else in the future as well. Don, you're bringing up some great points about schooling, and it reminds me back to your first question: when was I teachable? Because in high school it was, gosh, I just need to get through this to get out of here because I didn't like the town I was in, didn't have very many friends. Then I got to Georgia Tech and college, and I was like, God, I just really want to get out of here because I want my commission. I really, looking back, I probably was not the most teachable person. I had some very, I can still remember Dr. Boston, who was my economics advisor for my my senior thesis. Really excited me about economics. I've never used economics really since I graduated, but I go back in my mind to those feelings I had and those experiences I had with particular professors, and I can remember what they taught me. I found in the last 15 years where if you ask me for a knowledge on something, and I'll say, gosh, I don't know, or you put me into a role where you say, you have to know everything about, in my case, I've pointed out in previous episodes, deception. Well, you can tell what somebody's working on by looking at their bookshelf because they're going to go out and learn everything. And I couldn't tell my wife at the time exactly what I was doing. And she came up and she goes, well, how's Mildeck treating you these days? And I said, how'd you know I was doing that? She goes, your bookshelf is covered. I can tell what you're working on because of it. So I've taken the perspective of, you want me to learn something, I'm going to go overboard. I'm going to read everything I can. And as I mentioned earlier, the last two books, one I'm listening to now and the previous one, I'm still learning about intelligence. And I've been studying intelligence. I first got interested in the subject when I learned what it was my dad did, which was cryptology, signals intelligence, back in 1978. So we always want to grow and learn something, and that's really what we come back to is, finding something you're passionate about or something that makes you excited to learn, having an interaction with people who've experienced it before and have something beyond the textbook experience, and then applying it to your own life and your own business. Because I can tell you, on my whiteboard over here, I've got a couple of things I've learned from listening to these books, going back to the books behind me and said, hey, that can apply to the situation that I'm looking at my next case, my next investigative case. It all applies somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's so vital. And, one quick thing before switching over to Jason is, it's been said a formal education will make you a living, a self-education will make you a fortune. right? Because if you follow the road that everybody else is on, you'll stay on that road and you'll be just like them. The people who take the road less traveled, the people who aren't afraid to be alone for a while until they find what it is and who they are, thrive. Ford Sykes, really quick, who's a guest here on occasion, he had a different childhood. He quit school at ninth grade, never knew his parents, shuffled around from one home to another, and actually said he never believed he'd live to see 25 the way he was going, because actually, he took a different course until he found a role model, and he switched, and then he became significant. So a lot of early experience, early people, family, role models, and you got to ask yourself, who was your role model? Because if you look at great baseball players, they're usually the son of another baseball player or the grandson of another one. Why? They grew up in a baseball family and they had all of that exposure, and it's the same thing. So Jason, coming up on top of the hour, this has been a very interesting conversation, because you take a word like teachable, and by itself, it doesn't really hold weight, let's say like collaboration or a situation like that. So what are your composite thoughts now?
So much good stuff, and yeah, we definitely could go a long time with this topic and this just group, and I love that the community chimed in today and added to the richness of the conversation. You were saying, kind of offhandedly, you're talking about, who motivates you and what's your role model, and I was going to share this earlier, it just didn't fit the conversation, but succinct as possible. My father is my role model for learning, but he is the one that's, to look at it from the outside, you would not think that. So my dad's a cowboy. My dad was born in 1938, was born on a ranch back in Southern California when it was ranches. Long story, but he's a cowboy. Grew up riding horses, working with cattle, stuff like that. Then, they moved up to Northern California. Dad didn't really care for school. Once again, he wasn't really good at school. And this is something I just found out this year, which is crazy. He didn't graduate high school. He ended up getting his GED like 8 years later, but he left high school like 5 months early to go in the Marine Corps. And he joined the Marine Corps and did his thing and did his time. And so didn't finish, didn't graduate high school, got a GED later, didn't go to college, worked on ranches, worked on, did labor stuff, had his own business cutting lawns for time. But anyway, so not someone you look and go, oh, that's going to be your role model for learning. But there was always like classical music and music in the house. He was always reading. My passion for reading comes from my dad. He's 86 years old. He had a stroke 10 years ago, recovered for the majority of it, but he reads all the time. My stepmom's always buying him books. He'll see a topic on, and not just light stuff, the universe, and he's into all these topics, and he's always reading, and that's where I get it from. So don't discount somebody because they don't have the same education that you think is where they're going to get it from. And the last thing I want to say is the value of learning. You have to see the value of learning, because ask yourself this: is your life perfect? Is every area of your life exactly where you want to be? And if the answer is, well, no, and it shouldn't be, then you have more to learn. So be open to learning more and expanding your life. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, those are great points, Jason, all during the show, both you and Dave. So Dave, your final thoughts?
I think I've shared them. I'm good. I think I appreciate Jason's story even more. My dad is my educational experience idol and the guy I've looked up to, and probably why my career took the path that it did. And story for another show. We can go on about how he's impacted my life.
Yeah, that's terrific. We're running out of time, so I can't get into too much more detail, but I think there is a balance between what you learn from the outside and what you learn from the inside. And again, there's a balance. Boy, I read so much, know so much, and I've never applied it. Versus going inside and saying, at a certain point when you're a kid, you don't know anything. You're an open book and people fill it for you.
Right.
But over time, you start to see what does work, what doesn't work, and more importantly, how you resonate with it. Sometimes you're just right at home in a situation. It could be a subject, it could be a class. I've had people speak for hours and I was still holding my breath for every next word.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get enough of them. And some people, after 5 or 10 minutes, it's like, how do I get out of this thing? Instead of suffering anymore. But, knowing yourself helps you get to know other people and allowing people in, keeping that door open, and always, saying, I'm not sure, but I'm willing to listen, or I think I know what I need to do. But hey, if you got a suggestion, because everybody is giving you clues if you're open to finding them.
Yeah.
And you don't have to take everything at wholesale. You could take 10% of what they said, discard the other 90, or a lot of times people will tell you things that confirm and validate what you need to know. So it's not a change. It's like 3 more votes in this favor, and when I was on the fence, now I'm going to move to there. But knowing that you can move back, you can move any direction. It's the people who are frozen.
Right.
It's like a target that isn't moving. Eventually you're going to get hit. If you keep nimble, you keep moving around. Plus it's more fun. The beauty of life is facing a new day, not fearing a new day. And that's what's happening. A lot of people, to Jason's point, are getting marginalized, going back into shadow. Why? It's safe. It's not fun. It may be not growth oriented. But if you lock the door, and hopefully it's a good lock, you're safe from the outside. And as soon as you walk outside, you're exposed.
Yeah.
Again, exposure could be the best thing in the world and the worst thing in the world. But that's part of the learning processes. Now it's not about options. It's about picking and choosing. And the other thing is, how long are you going to stay with something? How many people read the first chapter and start a new book? And all they've done is run 20 first chapters and never gone beyond it. So we could talk forever, which means we're talking pretty well. Want to thank everybody. Come back tomorrow. We've got Kelly. We've got Jason. And if Dave wants to join, we've got Dave too.
Right.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I can never thank all of you enough, because you sure make my life better for being in it and more rewarding. And knowing, I think the main thing in closing is the possibilities are limitless. It's always up to you to decide, what more do you want to learn? Where do you want to learn it? How do you want to learn it? And that way, when it happens, the teacher will already know you're ready to go, right? So you got to be motivated.